Welcome back to the Chapter 8 mini lecture on organizing work. As promised, this will be a full video lecture on Chapter 8. In the past, I've provided video lectures only on select topics in each chapter. In the interest of getting this course back on the schedule, I'll be providing a full Chapter 8 lecture. And when we speak of the term organization, we are talking about any group of people who are working together to meet certain objectives. In business, these objectives are usually part of the company's mission, part of a departmental responsibility, or maybe even part of an individual project or contract. The whole reason why we want a team of people working together within some sort of organizational guideline is because we believe that the group of people or organization can more readily meet the objectives than what they could accomplish as individuals. So if the organization is the business unit, then organizing has to do with setting objectives for that business unit and making sure that the work is assigned properly. Now, even though we will be referring to formal organizations in this lecture, it is important to remember that organizations are made up of people. And as long as people have interactions and relationships and common interests on a personal level, there will be strong informal organizations operating within larger formal operations. Now, if you've ever worked in a disorganized company, you are already familiar with all the reasons why an organization would want to be organized. It is difficult to work in a company where there are no established lines of authority. Even as a customer, you may find it difficult to purchase products and services from an organization where when the lines of authority are weak. In some organizations, there are no lines of authority, and when this condition exists, the entire organization falls to the whims of the individuals working within it. Now, when a company is well organized, it will yield a high quality output, whether or not a good or service, and will be efficient in producing. And this is when you have this type of division of labor, you have increased coordination and better communication. It is also important to remember that when a company is well organized, the venue for timely and responsible communication is present. It does not mean that everyone knows everything all the time, but it does mean that important communication is handled in a standardized and methodical way. From an employee standpoint, company management will notice that people in their organization will start to develop specializations as the division of labor becomes better defined. Large-scale deployment of technology becomes possible, and management can keep a closer eye on their external environment. The transaction costs may begin to decrease, and the management will have a more consistent power and control over the organization. Now, before we get too far in the chapter, let's talk about the different types of division of labor. One way is to organize the company in terms of vertical division of labor. And if you look at a typical organizational chart, you will see that there are maybe only one or two people named at the top of the chart. And that one or those people at the top may have one or two managers in place below them. But under those two managers, there may be several departments over which they have control, and this is a flat type of organizational structure. However, if you decide to group your employees by the type of work they do, you are moving toward a more horizontal division of labor, and this gives a group of employees who specialize in the same activity the chances to become very efficient and increase the quality of what is being generated. Now, most companies use some type of horizontal division. There are several advantages to allowing your employees to specialize. From the most obvious perspective, you need fewer people. This is explained by the fact that in horizontal divisions, employees specialize. And when employees become highly efficient, you need fewer employees to complete a task. Another big advantage to the horizontal division of labor includes the ability to supply and train your employees. For example, if you own a trucking company and you have created a dispatch department to handle your national fleet, then it becomes very easy to supply and train the dispatch department because all the people are in the same place. The more experienced workers can support new additions to the department. And even though the slide refers to proficiency, efficiency, concurrency, and product conformity, we've already mentioned how these evolve when specialized employees work closely together. On the other hand, a big disadvantage of a horizontal structure is that employees can become very bored in their work. Many people enjoy a job that is broad in scope, and basically what that means is that in a single job there are many different types of tasks involved. Let's think about the responsibilities of a travel agent. A travel agent will help a customer to select a proper vacation for their family, may book tickets, may solve problems with travel while the customer is on vacation, may even help with filing insurance claims, and may work with different types of companies offering different types of vacations to different attractions. A travel agent may work with airlines and cruise ships, trains, and even inclusive resort destinations. On the other hand, the responsibilities of a seamstress in a t-shirt factory may lack scope. The main responsibility of that job may be to sew on the collar, and for 8 hours that employee may perform no other task. Believe it or not, there are people who prefer a job with a limited scope. Not everyone desires to have a job where the requirements are constantly changing. Now, when it comes to job depth, those who prefer to work with a certain amount of autonomy typically will seek out jobs that allow them to plan and organize their own work and work at their own their pace and move around and talk to coworkers. A person who works in a call center and answers the phones to provide customer service may not have a job with a lot of job depth. As a call center representative, they have to stay at their workstation. They are expected to render customer care services and to protect the interests of the company. They may have only a few options from which to choose to meet a customer's need. In contrast, an attorney may have a job that has a great deal of job depth. They can work alone or as part of a team. They can also work with other law firms. They can manage their own calendars and their workflows, and when needed they can consult other attorneys in the firm. But division of labor only works under very specific circumstances. If you're going to take the work that is available to do in your company and allow it to be broken down into stages, there has to be a large enough volume of work to allow for the specialization. And think about the job of a secretary. If the secretary works for the senior partner of a law firm and that senior partner is extremely busy, the secretary's job may be broad in scope and in job depth because he or she has to take care of everything. This is typically the case in small law firms. Now, if that same secretary works at an extremely large law firm, maybe at its Washington, D.C. office, that secretary may have a limited scope and a limited depth in their job. The attorneys may do a lot of their own typing, but the secretary may be responsible for filing and tracking client files. If court documents need to be filed, the secretary may take care of that, but the traditional role of legal secretary may be different from that of a legal secretary in a small law firm. And paralegals in a large firm may do a lot of the client work that used to be done by the legal secretaries. So if the division of labor is going to work for the company, they must have a group of employees who show up for work every day. There should be limited quality failures from suppliers. Product design should be set up and already consistent, and technology should be readily available. Now that we've talked about the employee and how the work of the employee can be organized, let's back up a second and look at the management. Management should have power, authority, and responsibility. And I'm sure that we can think of instances when this has not been the case. Power is very specific in meaning. Power means that the person has influence and command over another person. And in most cases, management controls their employees by controlling resources. By giving their employees resources, they empower their employees. By restricting the access to resources, management can limit their employees' ability to function in certain areas. Authority speaks to the rights that a person has when they serve in a certain capacity. So when power is exercised in a legitimate way, it represents authority. And when you are in a management position, you want to confirm that you have both the power and authority to act. This can be a real problem if it doesn't exist, and it can be a huge problem in small businesses. In small businesses, the owner of the company may delegate some aspects of power to a key employee. There is certainly nothing wrong with this, and it should be encouraged. The problem can occur when the owner of the company delegates to the key employee certain powers, but withholds the authority. For example, let's think about an owner of a small frozen yogurt shop. That business owner may give a key employee, let's say a store manager, the power to create the work schedule for all the other employees. However, the key employee, the store manager, may not have the authority to enforce the work schedule. So if an employee shows up late for their shift, or maybe does not show up at all, the store manager may not be able to discipline that employee because they have not been given any authority. Responsibility is just as important. Responsibility deals with accountability for the resources. And if you are responsible for something in the company, you are also responsible for meeting objectives and making sure that you stick to the company policy. If you accept responsibility for something, you now have the obligation to make sure that what is supposed to happen is truly happening. So let's go back to the example on the yogurt shop. The store manager is responsible for organizing the work schedules. But if an employee decides to skip their shift, the store manager does not have any of the authority to discipline that employee. Now, it would be horrible for that store manager. If the manager had accepted the responsibility for staffing the store, in essence, that would mean that the store manager would have the responsibility for being there even if no one else shows up. So it is important when you accept a job that makes you responsible for certain functions that you make absolutely sure that you not only have the power to make something happen, but you also have the authority to take corrective action. Many new managers get themselves into uncomfortable situations because they accept responsibility for something over which they have no authority. So if authority is so important, where does it come from? And there are two theories relating to the source of authority. In essence, authority comes from the people working above you or the people working below you. And a formal theory of authority basically states that authority comes from those who are higher in the organization. Authority flows from the very top of the organization to the very bottom. And the acceptance theory states that a manager's authority will come from the subordinates of that manager. So in the formal theory, authority is coming from the top. In the acceptance theory, authority is coming from the bottom. And if the subordinates, according to the acceptance theory, recognize the manager's authority as legitimate authority, then they'll recognize it. And if the subordinates do not recognize the manager's authority as legitimate, then it doesn't exist. So remember in the earlier example of the yogurt shop, when we spoke of the dangers of a manager having responsibility but not having authority, we were speaking of the Parity Principle. In order for a manager to be fully functional as a manager, having the power, authority, and responsibility is essential. And managers who do not have all three find it nearly impossible to do their jobs. So in the case of the yogurt shop, the owner of the business conveyed to the manager the responsibility to prepare the shift schedules, but did not convey the authority. This violated the Parity Principle. So what are some of the reasons why a business owner might not convey both authority and responsibility? The first reason has to do with the fact that the business owner may fear that the subordinates will fail. If a business owner is highly risk averse, meaning they are very uncomfortable with taking risks, the business owner may not feel comfortable delegating the authority and the responsibility, especially if they think that the employee may fail. Many people believe that it's easier to do something yourself. It's easier to do something yourself than to ask someone else to do it. This is also a significant reason. As a third reason, which I think is less common, the business owner might be a little jealous of their employees and feel that the employees may outperform them. It is also quite possible that the business owner will just simply enjoys doing the work and they are comfortable acting in that capacity. They simply may not want to make any changes. Sometimes business owners might believe managers will not care as much about the outcomes as they do. And to the credit of some business owners are just not willing to assign any work until they have done it themselves. So let's go over the steps in the delegation process. When you work through these steps, you should prepare answers to these questions from the perspective of the person who's doing the delegation. Analyze how you spend your time. This is very important because as a business owner or even as a manager who is preparing to delegate work to someone else, you first have to decide where your own time and resources are going. After are the tasks that are exceptionally time consuming for you to complete? Let me say that again. Are there tasks, do tasks exist that are exceptionally time consuming for you to complete? Are there tasks that are repetitive and someone else could be easily trained to take over the process? Are there activities that you as the manager are failing to complete because you're doing lower level work? These are examples of questions that you need to ask when you're analyzing how to spend your time. And you should also look at things like peak reporting periods, deadlines, company needs, customer needs, staffing. Decide, as step 2, decide which tasks can be assigned. And this involves looking at the skill set of your employees. You want to make absolutely certain that when you assign a task to someone, they have the skill set to do what you're asking them to do. And if you need additional training, if they need additional training, provide it. And although you may want to match tasks to the skill sets, do not be afraid to challenge your employees. Many times when new tasks are being assigned, employees will feel that they are incapable of doing the new work. It is your job as a manager to also encourage your employees to take on new assignments and to grow into larger roles. Delegate authority. Delegating the authority is a formal move on the part of the manager. And at times in my past, when I have been given a new project, a new responsibility, or a new role, I have asked my manager or supervisor to send out a memo or an email. The memo or the email would state something like that I'm taking over the new project or new role, and it directs other people with whom I'll be working to cooperate with me and to follow my lead. And ultimately, you have to earn the respect of the people with whom you work, but it will make it easier in the long run if you can request from your boss that this formal communication, this introduction of sorts, be distributed to the other people that you're going to be working around. You want to create an obligation, that responsibility. And when creating an obligation, you should sit down with the employee to whom you're delegating and confirm that they understand that if they accept the new work, they will need to be obligated to see it through to completion. It is also a good idea to remind your employee that, if in the future they can't complete it, it's their responsibility to come back to you and request further assistance in terms of resources or ask that the project be reassigned. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, and when it comes to delegation, there is one exception that many managers will employ. Some managers believe that it is their responsibility to take care of issues that are not part of routine business. And this may also include handling customers who are not typical customers or who do not act like typical customers. They will enable their employees to free up time to handle routine work in which they can be efficient and accurate. And I actually employed this rule one time. It did not take too long before all the problems in the company were sitting on my desk, and my employees had settled into it, into an understanding that if the task was too complex, too difficult, or took too long to complete, they could delegate it back to me as the company owner. And obviously you can't run a company like that. The other disadvantage involves micromanaging. If managers hold too much work on their desk, they find themselves involved in making everyday decisions which probably should be made by the employees. So let's talk about some important concepts regarding authority. One concept is called unity of command, and it basically means that an employee should only have to answer to one supervisor. Now, there is an exception to this in matrix organizations, which you will usually report to a functional manager and then a supervisor in matrix organizations. The second principle is called the scalar principle or the scalar principle. This is basically a chain of command. The authority and organizational empowerments flow from the top to the bottom, And the last principle refers to span of control. Now, this number can differ from organization to organization. It can also differ based upon industry in which you were working, or the number can also be impacted by the type of employees you're supervising. The span of control is the number of employees that a manager can effectively manage. Most companies will set their span of control somewhere around 10 employees. I've seen it as high as 30 on the plant floor. It is important to know that when a standard is in, it's important for you to know what the standard is in the company, because it is a good indicator for you as the manager to know when it might be time to start looking for a promotion for yourself or grooming someone in your department to replace you. So in this slide, we're looking at some other factors that can determine span of control. If the work is highly complex, the span of control will be set at a lower number, maybe something like 7. If the work is highly dynamic and changes all the time, it could be also lowered for that reason. However, if people work in close proximity, if the employees are of a high quality, if they participate in managerial duties, the span of control may be set at a higher number, maybe closer to 15 or 20. In public corporations, they will have a tapered concept of authority. After all, the board of directors is elected by the stockholders and the stockholders and shareholders in the public corporation. The board of directors hires the president. The president is responsible for carrying out the orders from the board of directors and operating the company. And you can see in this in this figure that the scope of authority decreases as you approach the lower levels of the company. Most of the authority, power, and responsibility is concentrated at the top of these corporations. Another aspect of organizing a company deals with whether or not the company will operate under a centralized or decentralized structure. If a company is highly centralized, all decision-making authority will reside in the top tiers of the company. And if the company is decentralized, then the subordinates will have a great deal of input into decisions and the authority to carry them out. Now, when we go back and revisit the organizational structure of a public company, we can see that in a centralized organization, there's almost no authority at the lower tiers of the company. When the authority is delegated throughout the organization, resulting in a more decentralized framework, you can see that that leaves more authority available to those who work at the lower tiers of the company. And this is important because your customers typically work the employees that usually work with your customers are those who are at the lower tiers of the company. And in order to maintain quality and customer satisfaction, the employees who have the most contact with the customers should have some authority and power. And that leads us to the discussion on empowerment. Empowerment includes participation, innovation, access to information, and accountability. If employees participate, they are interested in improvement in the work and in their relationships at work. Employees are great resources of innovation if they are encouraged to work to that end. Information needs to be distributed throughout the organization so employees have access to it, and ultimately the employees need to be held accountable for those tasks for which they're responsible. And when a decision is made to empower those employees who work closely with the customer, that decision is going to impact the organizational structure. In many cases, departments and business units may have to be restructured. Organizational rules may have to be rewritten or abandoned altogether maybe. Personal accountability is encouraged and rewarded, and a learning environment is created. One way to empower employees is through self-managed work teams. And self-managed work teams motivate the employees that are involved with them, but also enables the work teams enable the employees to work without direct supervision. So some of the changes that have been made in organizations over the last few years have included the implementation of flex time, where employees can work in groups or teams to meet scheduling needs, to avoid rush hour, to increase productivity. Of course, when you allow employees to schedule their own shifts, communication and coordination problems can occur. Telecommuting is another trend that is going on. You may have noticed recently in the news that Yahoo has requested that all their employees start working on site again. So they're taking away this telecommunication capability from their employees. They probably came up with some disadvantages on it. A lot of people telecommute because you're working from home. There's a lower turnover, less travel time. You're avoiding rush hour. You're avoiding distractions at the office. And there's lower office costs associated with having employees work in their homes. But there's also some disadvantage. There could be some insurance problems there if there's a health or safety concern. And some state and local laws will restrict what kind of work can be done at home. But I think that one of the most important things to consider with telecommuting is that you really have to concentrate on the hiring process and make sure that you hire the right employees, because you might have lower turnover, you might have less travel time, and you may be avoiding rush hour altogether, but that doesn't mean that employee won't still be late. Just because they're avoiding distractions at the office doesn't mean that they're not going to be encountering distractions at home. And you know, working flexible hours, that's great, but you don't want it to go too far out of the normal business hours of the company, or otherwise the needs of the customers won't be met. So you have to be careful with telecommuting and make sure that everything is balanced when you start making organizational changes like that. Job sharing is another change, and this allows two people to share the same jobs. They share the hours, the work, and the pay, and the benefits. So this is another option for two people to share the same job if neither one of them can work full time. So this includes the full lecture on Chapter 8. I would encourage you to go through the textbook and at least look at the figures and make sure that you understand that. You may want to review the summary in the back and go over the key terms. And if you have any questions, please let me know.